Rum, 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 rum. Oh, hey there. You want to go for a ride in my hot rod? It's got suspension. It's got brakes. It's got steering. Oh, wait. No brakes and no steering. Dang it. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Cody Builds. Tonight we're going to finish up the braking system on the 1975 Ford F150 project. First, I want to talk to you a little bit about an issue I ran into. Had to pay the idiot tax, and it hit me hard this week. It's the first time on this project. So when I ordered the rear brake kit, I think I said in a previous video I was going to have to drill out the backing plates, this, that, and the other, because of 3/8 studs versus 1/2 inch studs. Well, I started doing some looking, some measuring, and it turns out I actually ordered the wrong parts. Ugh. So what I ended up having to do was go and find the correct backing plates. What I had was the smaller bolt pattern Ford 9-inch axle flange spacing. And I'll actually just show you here on the backing plates. I've got an old one and a new one. I've already switched one of these over. This is my new one here. You can see these backing plates are identical, other than if I try and line these holes up, you can see I'm lined up in the top holes and the bottom holes are not lined up. So I had to pay the idiot tax, buy 2 new backing plates. It's okay. The other option, I already had a bunch of stuff out of the boxes unwrapped. I was gonna have to box everything up, ship the whole kit back, order a different kit. And the issue with that is it didn't have the right hub studs. I was gonna have to end up buying different discs with different bolt patterns and kind of mix and match the parts anyways. So Summit had the right backing plates. They were 50 bucks a pop. So cost myself an extra 100 bucks there, but I'll have these extra backing plates in the event that we ever have a different ride that needs them. No biggie there. So I've already gone ahead and done one of the switchovers. I wanted to make sure that those backing plates were going to work. I'm not a drum brake expert. These are just the parking brake for this setup. So I'm probably just going to time lapse this. You guys can see me struggle with these, assemble this other drum brake. And then after I get that installed, we're going to go ahead and drill out the axle flanges on the Ford 9-inch axles. So we've got to, there's no hole in the flange of the axle that will allow a socket to pass through when the brakes are installed on the axle. So we have to get the die grinder out. We're going to mark out a hole, drill out a hole big enough for a socket on the flange of the axle so that when we go to install these backing plates and parking brake system, we'll be able to pull the axle out, slide the backing plates onto the studs, put the axle back in, then install the bolts through the axle flange. So that's on the agenda for tonight. So first up, I'm going to go ahead and get this other parking brake setup switched over. I'm not really going to explain it because 1, I'm not a drum brake expert by any means, and 2, this is not something you should have to do if you're buying the kit. Just buy the right kit. Buy the right kit. Make sure you're looking at the axle flange measurements. I went off the pictures, big mistake. I have what Wilwood calls the old big Ford bearing rear end. And when I ordered my axles, I'm almost certain that it was a new style big Ford bearing axle. It probably didn't make a difference for the axle. I did get the right retainer plates with that, so I don't know. Difference in terminology or something. They both sides had the measurements. I should have just, when I ordered the Wilwood system, I should have just measured out the axle flange spacing on the bolts, but oh well. I paid the tax on that. The other issue, by the end of this video, we're going to have wheels and tires on this thing. I went to put the wheels on the front, and I had bought some junk wheels, some junk Camaro wheels. I'll actually show them now. They're going to go on the back. But I picked these up off of Facebook Marketplace for 75 bucks for all 4 wheels and tires. They all hold air. And it was just going to be to roll this thing around. And I should have thought about this as well, but I didn't. I was just looking for anything because I didn't have any junk Chevy wheels laying around. I didn't even think about the back spacing on the wheels. There's way too much back spacing on the Camaro wheels. So I can't even get within like 2 inches of the hub face because the wheels hit on the tie rods, they hit on the control arm. So that was a disaster. So I ended up picking up some Unilug wheels, mock-up wheels off of Facebook, kind of cheap. They weren't the right size, but I had some spacers laying around, some adapters laying around that we can throw on the front. It's kind of a convoluted way, but all I'm worried about right now is getting the truck to roll. So at the end of the video, I'll put those on. This truck will finally be on the ground on all 4 tires. Let's get to work. All right, mistake fixed. We've got our backing plates, the right backing plates installed, and we're ready to move forward with the next step here. So next up, we need to cut those holes in the axle flanges like I was saying. So we're gonna go ahead and do that, and then we'll get these brakes installed. All right, next up, we need to drill a hole out in this axle flange to be able to pass a socket through. So what I've done here is I've got our new axle stud in there. I've got a nut on it, and I've got the corresponding socket on it. And I'm just going to take this socket, back it up, and put it onto the axle flange here. And what I'm trying to do is line this socket up with the edge of an existing hole. So we don't have to take out any more metal than we really need to. So I've got this socket lined up on one of the holes here, and I'm just gonna mark all the way around that socket. All right, I got the axle up here on the bench, and I just kind of laid this once I had it figured out where it was gonna be. I just laid the socket up here and kind of backfilled so I know to go right up to the marks on this. That's going to leave plenty of meat between the holes here. It shouldn't be an issue. I mean, these are drilled on most all vehicles. That's kind of the pain of these multi-lug cheap axles. But anyways, I'm going to go ahead and just take a die grinder and the grinding tool here, and we're just going to work this hole out until we get the socket to the right size where it will slide into that hole. So now you can see we can pass the socket through there. So it's the minimum size it needs to be. I mean, I shouldn't take off, there's not really, you know, I'm not taking off any extra. It just barely slides through there as it is. So it's a little close to this hole, but there's not going to be any stress on this lug because there is no lug in it. I left as much meat on the bone as I could on this stud, so I think it's going to be just fine. Down the road, if we have issues, these were cheap axles anyways. I don't want to replace them, but if we had to down the road, that's something we could do. I don't anticipate it being a problem for what we're going to be doing with this truck. Also, if you look, it's got a really nice thick flange on these axles, so they're going to be way stronger than, say, a stock axle or something like that. So I've got this one done. I'm going to go ahead and do the other side. I'll probably, before I do that, I'm going to clean this axle up, get all the metal filings off of it, and we're going to slide it back in and make sure that we can actually access the bolts now that we've got the hole and that everything's going to work out there. So I'll do that next. I'll clean the axle up, we'll get it back in the housing, and we'll just confirm that this access hole is going to work to bolt the axle retainer flange back on. So what I've got is I've got the axle back in, I've got the retaining flange on, axle retainer flange on, and what I'm going to do is try and run all of the nuts into the bolts, the T-bolts here, through the axle flange as if the brake system were in place, because when we put the brake backing plate on, we're no longer going to have access through between the axle flange and the axle housing. So I'm going to just take a nut and an extension and a socket here and see if I can line everything up and get the nuts started. Oh yeah, this is going to work great. So I got one started there. We're just going to make sure we can get the socket off and get it back through. That's perfect. That's exactly what we're looking for. Gonna spin this around. Yeah, perfect. This is going to be great. There we go. Nice. Okay. Okay, that was a success. Oh, don't speak too early. There we go. That's a success. Yeah, so that access hole works perfect. It's the exact right size we need, and it lines up. If it lines up with one bolt, it should line up with all of them, but we just confirmed it lines up with all the bolt holes. So that's going to be perfect. Now we can go ahead and get the brake backing plates installed, and the calipers and the rotors. So I'm going to go ahead and jump to the other side, mark and drill out the same hole on that flange as we did on this one. And then when all that's said and done, we'll get to installing the back brakes. All right, now we're finally ready to start installing the brakes on the rear end. So we're going to start with the backing plate first. I've got my new T-nuts in the axle flange here. The next thing that's going to go on is our backing plate and parking brake assembly. These are marked on this bracket right here, right-hand side, with the e-brake bracket is going to go up on this side. So that's just going to go right over our T-nuts there. Okay, once that's on, the next piece that goes on is going to be the axle. We're going to slide the axle back in. Okay. Okay, before we get the axle fully in, I want to get my retainer ready. Slide it in. Now the retaining The retaining clip is going to go with the opening up, and then there's a little flange side, and that flange side is going to go back against the bearing, so against the bearing seal. Okay, got one side started, and I'm just going to work my way around. And I'm hoping, I've got very little clearance here. I'm hoping once I get everything tightened down that I'll have a little more clearance on everything. All right, a little trick here. I don't have enough thread showing with the nut in to be able to get this started. The nut's too far down inside the socket, so I'm gonna throw a couple washers down in the bottom of my socket and take some of that gap up. Hopefully that will allow me to now start this nut. All right, same idea, only this time I'm just throwing a small nut down in the socket. It takes up a little more. Now the head of this nut is just barely sticking out of the socket. So socket will still hold it in place. I'm going to tighten this down just a little bit. I finally got started. Okay. All right, that worked pretty well. All right, I've got all my axle retaining nuts in now, so I'm going to torque these down to 50 foot-pounds. Boy, very little clearance there, and that is a pain to get those on, so hopefully I don't have to do that too frequently. Next, there is for this axle, because there's a difference in the diameter of the hub of the axle flange and the rotor hat. There is a little adapter in there, so that adapter goes in. It indexes with, it's got a little step in it, so the larger diameter goes flat against the axle flange, and then your rotor goes on. Find the right thread there, and you can see that adapter poking through there. So the next thing we're going to do here, we're going to get the calipers and the bolts, and then we're going to align the caliper much in the same way we did on the front. Okay, now for the calipers, these don't appear to be directional. There are bleeders on top and bottom. If you have a kit that only has bleeders on one side of the caliper, your bleeder always goes to the top. If you don't put your bleeders up, when you go to bleed the brakes, you'll never be able to get the air out of this caliper. Imagine you're bleeding from down here, air's gonna rise to the top of this caliper and sit in here, and you'll never ever be able to get rid of that. So for these particular calipers that I have for the back, they don't appear to be directional. Now the directions for mounting these say to start with 2 shims between the caliper and the bracket. So we've got a nut, a washer, and 2 shims. And before we Loctite anything, we're gonna mock this up and see what we have for clearance. Whoops. Just gonna hang this briefly. Oh boy, I can see we are way, way, way off. Boy, I feared this. I may not have the right back spacing. I measured it, but this is way off. Okay, I'm gonna throw all 4 shims in because I know right off the bat that what I'm seeing is not good. Hopefully that 4 shims might actually get me close. That's gonna be closer than 2. I can see from the start that 2 is not the right number. Oh yeah, that's gonna be pretty darn close for us. Okay, we're gonna run these bolts down tight. Still might be just slightly off. We'll see once we get it tightened down here. It's not looking overly promising. Well, you know what? It's actually not bad. It looks worse at the top than it does at the bottom for some reason. All right, I've got my calipers here. I'm gonna do the same thing we did previously. I'll measure it up and then I'll bring you guys in for a look. I have clearance, but I'm not aligned very well, and I think this would lead to uneven pad wear if I was to rock with what I've got. Oh boy, these brakes are just fighting me every step of the way here. All right, let me bring you in here and show you what I'm looking at. If you look, bring the light over here. If you look inside, when the rotor is tight, you can see visually that the rotor is not centered in the caliper. It's off pretty significantly, which means that there is a back spacing bracket back here that is the wrong size. So I've royally screwed up in ordering these brake parts, or they're just not fitting very well. I measured the back spacing off of the axle flange to the front of the axle, I'm sorry, from the front of the axle flange to the axle housing. And I ordered the back spacing kit for what that measurement was. So the only way to get adjustment out of this any further would be to add more shims. And if I do that, if I add more shims in here, you're gonna start to get flex in this as you space this away from the bracket. So we don't necessarily wanna do that. The only other way is to put a larger spacer in back here. There's a spacer between the backing plate and the caliper bracket. And that's the only way that we're gonna get the caliper moved deeper back onto the rotor. So I'm gonna take some measurements. I'm gonna figure out exactly how far this caliper has to move. But if you look down the caliper, you can see it pretty well there, how tight we are on the back side and how much space we have on the front. Oh man, this thing, this Wilwood kit is fighting me. It's really unfortunate. I thought for sure I wouldn't have this many issues. Some of them are self-inflicted. This one I'm not so sure because I did the measurements. So whether I got the wrong parts or it's just poor fitment, I'm not sure at this point. But the good news is we do have clearance still. So this isn't going to keep me from throwing the wheels on and rolling this thing out. I can do a little research, figure out what I can do if I have to make a larger spacer for that caliper mount, or if I can buy one from Wilwood, whatever I have to do to make that fit right, I'll do. So we'll go ahead, we'll get the other side mounted up just like we did this one, and then we'll throw wheels on this thing, and we'll drop it on the ground, and we'll be done for the night. right, she's finally on the ground. Just a few short months of work, and we finally have this thing back into a roller. Finally. Oh man, it feels good to see this thing on the ground on all four wheels. Now, don't freak out about the tires. They're garbage tires. They're just to move this thing around. I've said it before, I'll say it again. You guys aren't even gonna see the final wheels and tires on this thing until this thing fires up and rolls out of the garage. I just so believe that the wheels and tires make the vehicle, and I want that to be like the final touch on this truck. I've already got them picked out. I don't have them yet. I have them picked out. So last update, I guess, on the rear brake situation. I don't know exactly what went wrong. I know that I measured the back spacing between the axle housing and the axle flange. It's possible I mismeasured, but we are about a 1/4 inch off from where we need to be. When you figure in both all four shims and the difference of how far we still are out, it comes out to about a 1/4 of an inch. So what I need is a wider spacer between the caliper and the backing plate, the caliper mount and the backing plate. There's a spacer in there. It needs to be about a 1/4 inch wider, maybe a little bit less than that. I wrote down, I got the vernier calipers out and I measured exactly how far apart we were between the two spacing wise within the disc brake. And then I figured out how thick all four shims were. So I'm gonna take all that information, I'm gonna call up Wilwood, I'm gonna see if they can send me the appropriate spacer for the backing plate, for between the backing plate and the caliper mount. Now, if for some reason they are unwilling to work with me on that or are not able to provide it, I'm just gonna make one. I've got a buddy who's got a CNC table. If we wanna make a really nice one, I'll just pull the bracket that's on there off. We'll find 1/4 inch thicker material and we'll cut one up, paint it, throw it in there. It's not gonna be a big deal. All we have to do is relocate the back caliper inboard about a 1/4 of an inch. So one way or another, we'll be able to do that. The nice part is I don't actually have to take the axles out or take any of that stuff off. I can access the bolts for that spacer all from the back side when the wheels are off. So it's not even an urgent thing that I take care of right now. I'm gonna try and figure it out and get the parts order so I don't forget about it and I don't lose those measurements and then have to redo all that stuff down the line and try and remember what's going on. I just left the brake pads out for now. This thing fully rolls. Here, I'll give you a little snapshot here. It's just so easy to push this thing now. It's effortless. It's so nice. I'm so excited. It rolls so smooth. The thing is sitting so much lower than it was. I'll probably throw up a before clip on here of the chassis so you guys can see what it looks like before and what it looks like now. It's just such a difference and I'm so excited to get this thing back on the road. We still got a long ways to go. The end of the chassis means the beginning of the bodywork. So next up here, we're gonna be putting together a little dolly of some type for the bed and something that I can then convert and use for the cab as well. So I haven't decided exactly how I wanna make that yet, but when I make it, you guys will see it here on this channel. So stick around. Thanks for your support. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. If you like the videos, give me a like, give me a thumbs up. All that stuff helps. Let YouTube know you're enjoying the videos so more people can see them and enjoy them. And just thank you all for the positive comments. For those who are subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you. I can't thank you enough. Just a few short months, we've already gotten to nearly 350 subscribers. I kind of blew my expectations out of the water of where I thought this channel would go. So thank you all for watching. Stick around and remember, if you're not working on your project, it's not going to work on itself. Get out in the garage, get building, and I'll see you next week on Cody Builds.